manuhiri e whakapauho atu nei, i te whanganui a tara e whakatairanga ati ana tō tātou reo ka meha meha i tēnei wiki. Tēnei te mihi atu, kia koutou katoa. Tōku ingoa ko Vini, ko au te kai whakahaere i tēnei kōrero i tēnei haora nei, hoi anō, te mahi tuatahi he whakatau i tētahi manuhiri, ko tau mai ki Wainganui i a tātou i tēnei ahi nei. Nō reira, tēnei tangata no Ngāti Mania Poto, te kawai Māoro, mihi atu ana ki tēnei tangata, he mātanga, he atamai, he koi te hiningaro, ka mutu, he tangata kua roa e hāpai ana i tō tātou reo. Nō reira, aho nuku, te aho nuku, Awanui te Huia, nau mai, haere mai, ki Wainganui i a tātou. Te mahi tuatahi pia, te whakamōhio atu ki te iwi, no hea koe, ko wai koe. We've got such a range of whānau here that will be online, and so the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is just let the people know who you are.
Ka whai, o, tēnā koe, o tira, tēnā tātou e huitahi nei tēnei rangi. Ko Awanui te Huia hau, ai, he kaumahia hau ki te kawa Māui, no Ngāti Mania Poto, he heringa anō ki ngai tūhoi, he Pākehā hokia hau, no reira koe aku āhuatanga ki te whakapapa, hoi anō. He māma a hau, he kairanga hau a hau, he nui aku pōtai i tēnei wā, no reira, nei hokia hau e huri atu te rākau ki a koe wā, tēnā koe.
Awa, you are someone who has manaki'd me through my career, and so I wonder if we could start by, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about your research career, your work so far, where the different angles of your work have sat over your time as an academic, but also if you could talk a little bit about how that feeds into your life and what you want for your life and your babies and all those kinds of things.
He pātai nui tērā e hoa, ko te tūmanako ka tutuki i ahau, I roto I te wā poto, hoi anō. Thank you for the pātai, and thank you for, he rawe te noho tahi, tāua ki te kawa Māori. It's been awesome having the opportunity to sit with people like yourself. We've had lots of people who have been language enthusiasts through te kawa Māori. It has a rich history of people who have had a focus on rangahau reo Māori, so nā whai anō e noho ana hau ki reira mo te wā roa, e whakatipuria era āhuatanga ki roto i ahau. So from an early kind of career age, I sat with Professor Rawinia Higgins, so she was one of both of our supervisors, and that was a really cool experience to see what rangahau could look like outside of a whare wānanga, what it might mean for te iwi e kōrero Māori ana, kia whakawhanaki hoki atu tātou i ngā pūkinga, ako i te reo Māori. So there's lots of different ways in which whānau can participate in rangahau, as well as kai rangahau who might have an interest in te reo Māori can participate in rangahau. So, my interest areas have always integrated te reo Māori, and with a background in also psychology. So I've been a person with lots of hats as well, through trying to think about all of the ways in which we can think about language in the many different ways that we are Māori, as well as, at the kind of macro level, how do we get languages to be sustainable after they have gone through a number of series of affronts through colonial processes. That's another big part of my mahi, is thinking about how does colonial history and the presence of colonialism in Aotearoa impact on the decisions that we make when we choose to use te reo Māori, which is your kaupapa hoa, so language choice, as well as how do we create environments where it's not only safe for our whānau to be able to use te reo Māori across contexts, but also that we can create opportunities for new developments in our society. So koia hei whakautu pia I te pātai ahua, wii wawa nei, hoi anō koia.
Awesome. I think one of the things that I've learned about you over the years is your ability to encompass a wide range, like a really wide perspective into your life and into your work. And you mentioned some of them just before. There's this angle of decolonization, there's your background in psychology, there's your love and passion for te reo, learning and speaking, but also teaching the language. And I wonder if we can dive into, I think we will talk about some of your research more as our time goes on, but I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about how that passion feeds into your life journey for learning the language, and also your home life. I think there'll be lots of people that are here who are just beginning on a journey to learn te reo Māori, aren't too sure what that looks like. There'll be some people who have for ages have been trying to gear their homes for te reo Māori, but for whatever reason have maybe gone up and down. And there'll be people who've done it and might not realise that there's a bank of scholars out there like yourself and who want to know about their lives too when they do their research. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that, starting with your own journey and maybe through to your life, your whānau, your babies.
Ka pai, kia ora wā. I suppose, if I think about my life is just a series of other people's lives, so I am a part of my whakapapa. I bring with me the experiences of my whakapapa. So my life didn't just start with, when I was born. It obviously had a whole life to itself. But my time on this earth, if I think about the different kōrero that I've inherited in terms of, you also carry the experiences of those who have gone before us. So, I think about my pakeke, I think about my korauwa, my kuia, all of the people who have enabled me to have a passion for te reo Māori. This was something, one of my cousins, she shared with us a photo of our korauwa who was marching, at the first with Muldoon and, all these interesting things that were happening at the time with the rise of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, Te Rangi o Te Reo Māori. And so, I think activism is something that we also inherit, and we are also part of passionate people, we are passionate communities. But for myself, if I think about our childhood, yes, I was fortunate to grow up in a small town of Waimarama, and there we had a kohanga reo. And so my Pākehā mother actually, she took me to our kohanga reo. We then moved to Te Tai Tokerau in Ahipara, and there was a bilingual unit. We had Mrs. Burkhardt and Mrs. Morrison. See, these are still names I can remember. Don't ask me what I had for breakfast this morning or anything. I grew up in a household where te reo Māori was valued but not spoken, because that was there are very practical limitations on reo Māori use in my home. Huia no, that has also contributed to the decisions that I've made with my husband to whakatipuria a māua tamariki ki te reo Māori. That was a very clear decision that we had before we had kids, that and that's not always the way things work out. I know for other whānau, maybe ka tai mai te tamaiti katahi, ka tai mai te reo. Or, we have different arrangements in our homes. It was a very deliberate decision that both of us bought into prior to our pepe arriving in our lives. So, koia hei whakautupia. Yeah.
Pana, if you've just joined us, we're hearing a little bit from Associate Professor Awanui te Huia. If you do have any questions about the kinds of things that Awanui is talking about at the moment, please pop them in the Q&A chat box. There'll be a chance to ask questions and have them answered as we go through our session today. Awa, you talked just before with yourself and your partner about having discussions of what you wanted to have for your whānau life. What do those discussions look like for language? Like, did you sit down together and did you say, okay, I want my children's life to look like this? And then do you start working towards that together and building a plan, or did it just kind of fall into place? Or like, what can you Like, as much as you're comfortable sharing with it.
Like,
what's it like?
Yeah. Okay, well, he momo maiwa.
Yeah.
And actually that was one of the things that attracted to me to my husband was, I saw this very, ahua eccentric te ahua o Takutane. He was doing a debate at a kura reo, and I thought, no, that's the one for me. I think I'll go with this fella. Because we met in a space that if you're going to a kura reo and you've pushed through all of your personal struggles to finally arrive, and we were in the middle of fielding at Hatopaora. Huia no, long story short, what I'm saying is that by meeting in a reo Māori space, that was almost a precursor to what was to follow, because we had kind of got to through our own struggles to make the decision that we both wanted to struggle together in this reo Māori journey. So I think individually we had an understanding that it wasn't even really a spoken thing that we had to say. It was a given that we wouldn't want the same struggles for reclaiming our language for our tamariki, because we know this is bloomin' hard work, So what we knew we needed to do was continue to develop our own reo Māori, so that when the time came, and it was a very long time, we were slow movers, Tai and I, we both do things that take time. So eventually we have our babies, and but kua whakatō ke era whakaro ki roto i a maiwa. We also were surrounded by a very specific community who shared the goals that we had. We had excellent examples. I remember Paulette and Kōmene and people from Te Waipounamu who we could see, oh my gosh, imagine if, hei te wā ka tupu ake ka pērā. These are some beautiful examples. Stacey and Scotty, all of these people who we had heard their stories of, what it was like to be second language learners attempting to raise tamariki kōrero Māori in environments that weren't always conducive to that type of engagement. So he mea anu.
That sounds like, because you're a fair amount of your journey, you identified that both yourself and Tai were looking for, or you found some models in other people like Stacey and Scotty Morrison and Paulette and Kōmene down in Te Waipounamu, and you're looking at all these amazing people who are working to change their life. I would imagine that they had to make some pretty big decisions about their lives and their whānau, and I don't actually know for these people specifically. They might have to move. They might have to choose a different place to live. And I'm just wondering, do you think that's something that you had to go through? What are some of the big decisions you both felt like you might have to make, whether you made them or not, in order to give your children the language? Because I think there'll be people watching who are wondering about certain decisions and wondering if they're really big, and wondering, is this what everybody does? Love to hear about your whakaaro on that.
Yeah, pai era pātai e hoa. So when we were, early in our parenting journey, we kind of, there are decisions that you make as a mama, as a couple as well. So one of the decisions that I made for my pepe was that I wanted to be close to my baby, because I went back to mahi when she was only 1, for our first baby. I wanted to make sure that I could still feed her. And so that was a decision that I made, to be able to kind of have her close to mahi. So what that meant was that the options for kohanga reo were very limited at that time. As our baby grew, we realised that even with 2 parents, ko te reo Māori ana ke te reo ki a maiwa tamaiti, she was still getting a lot of English exposure through that early child care centre, even though, he nui te aroha ki te wāhira, me ngā kaimahi, we get attached to these places that we're sending our tamariki to because they're beautiful people and beautiful places. But the decision to put her into kohanga reo, we were very fortunate that there was a space available for her, as well as, thinking, so we kind of were a little bit, even though with my academic pōtai on, I should have known, hey, enroll her early, you know, that was kind of not really, it was just I runga I te aroha nui o te hapori me te kohanga reo e whai kuhunga mātou ki roto nei. And that was a similar situation, so we have moved, we moved our tamaiti, we moved our whole whānau out to Otaki, and so that was something that we feel very grateful for because as I was just talking to you about, he whakapapa tō tērā kaupapa, you know, that there's a lot of work that went into the community that continues to go into tērā kaupapa o whakatupuranga ruamano, and I don't want to speak to that because that's not, you know, I don't feel like I have the mandate to speak to that kaupapa, but I just, you know, I do mihi to the kaupapa because it's not as if it's just like you know, he mea poka noa, you know, we shouldn't really just be thinking, you know, for ourselves. It was a very big decision and it's also about the utu, you know, so if we are going to move to a place that has an established community, that community took a lot of effort to create those conditions for themselves. There was a lot of hard work and mahi that has gone into that. So it's not as if I'm just saying, you know, advocating, oh, just go there and, you know, kei te pai noa. No, you know, I think it's really important that we acknowledge that if we are going somewhere as rāwaho, that he utu tō tērā mahi. So, you know, we do need to be conscious of our contributions going into communities just because, you know, it's not just about te reo Māori, it's also about the hapori and how you see yourself being a contributor to that space. And obviously, you know, we try ourselves not to be a hoha, try to be a koha, you know, in that process. So yeah.
I would say, because I know both of you, I would say there's a lot that you both contribute back into the community because you have the proficiency and the passion for the language. So I'm sure it works both ways, and I'm sure that they absolutely love having you there. It's such a big decision to have to make, and I'm sure some people will be, you know, probably sitting at home to be able to, as much as possible, you know, contribute in the same way. I'm wondering now if we can. I don't want to lose the thread of kōrero about your whānau life, but I also do want to talk about your work. Your research in academia has paved a path for learners of Māori to feel comfortable about learning te reo Māori. And I know that you've done some research with both Māori and non-Māori, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your previous research work, particularly in and around things like learning anxiety and stuff like that.
Yeah, ka pai. Oh, well, you know, I suppose one of the big things that has come through our rangahau is that everybody experiences language anxiety at some point in their journey if they are a second language learner. And that's, you know, one of the surprising things actually is thinking about that even those who have high levels of proficiency, who are second language learners, still experience language anxiety at some, you know, in some context to some extent. So partly one of the things that was helpful for, you know, people who are on this journey to know is that normalising kōrero around what anxiety, you know, what are the physical manifestations of anxiety? What do they look like? What can I sense in myself, in my tinana? How can I help myself to identify emotions and then put a name to those emotions so that I can start to bring myself back into a state of mauri tau. And, you know, I've talked a little bit about, you know, our colonial history. When we understand the whakapapa to language, te tāmitanga o te reo Māori, you know, that we have had lots of language oppression, when we see that this is a systematic set of processes that has happened globally and we are part of this global system of language oppression for the purposes of you know, subordination. So, you know, once we understand and we can start to connect the dots and see that my individual experience is actually part of a wider set of processes, well, that can sometimes start to take the blame that I feel about feeling personally responsible for the fact that, oh heck, how come I'm still struggling to, say my mihi in front of this group of people, when the person sitting, 3 seats down, perhaps they've been to a night class, perhaps, he Pākehā, they don't have the same, trauma attached to unpacking what it means to be a language learner. So, anxiety, the roots of anxiety, that can, if we break up whakamā, and what that might look like for whānau, it's about what it means if I get things wrong. So what are the stories that I'm telling myself about if I make a mistake using te reo Māori, what does that mean for other people that I'm surrounding myself with? If I feel like I'm at threat, or if my sense of belonging, which I desperately want to belong to this group of people, if my sense of belonging is at threat, then that's going to be putting the risks really high for using my reo in this public sort of social interaction. And so if the risks are too high, I'm going to use English because I don't want to put myself in this position of risk. I also might have kind of like heightened amygdala. I might have, my brain might be saying, hey, don't put us in danger here, don't do it. And so I'm getting all this chemical feedback to say, actually, it's safer for us if we just speak English. Okay, so, kei te maramataua.
So does that mean, if you can just help me unpack it just a little bit, does that mean that something that I might be feeling, or someone watching might be feeling, we might be trying to search for ways to pass language on to our babies, for example, and I would assume, because most of us are, wanting to always make sure that our kids are calm, and we might be having to find ways to pass language on in a way that makes them feel calm and safe and typical and ordinary, but we ourselves might still be feeling some of those heightened senses. What did you call it? A heightened amygdala.
Yeah. Just thinking what part. I feel like I ramble for so long.
Can you, is that a thing? Is that what I'm doing? And I'm asking that because this is the situation where I'm thinking about, I'm coming up to parenthood, and I want to make sure that I'm calm and the best parent I can possibly be, and I certainly don't want my children to feel the same things that I've felt throughout my learning journey. So is that what's happening?
Yeah, so I think the challenge for parents is also that we're not in a perfect environment most of the time. We've got lots of different stresses, not just language stresses. We're trying to work out, is my baby not touching the oven dials? Is my baby, so there's lots of things that we are managing in the household. And so when we introduce language into the household, that's an added level of sort of cognitive load that we're loading onto an already kind of stressed in some situations parents, particularly if we have limited access to social support for our whānau. We also know, the mental health challenges that particularly mama are experiencing. We also, know the realities of what it looks like to be a parent with the cost of living crisis that we're experiencing. So there's lots of different stresses outside of language specifically. But what I think we can think about if we are a new parent is, how do I, I've talked about this a little bit about, we have kind of this area, so I've talked about it as like a Māori tau kind of model. So if I am in my Māori tau space, I'm able to make decisions really easily. I can communicate quite clearly. It's not as if I feel like there's any danger that's going to happen in this particular interaction. I'm a lot more likely to be myself, or to have most of my faculties about me if I'm in this Māori tau. But we can't just stay Māori tau. We want experiences that challenge us sometimes. We want experiences that are going to push us a little bit further so that we can grow. So let's say if this tepu is our safe space, right? We want that tepu to get a little bit bigger. And so in order for us to be able to achieve that, we need some tools, we need some resources, we need some supports that perhaps aren't available or, we haven't found because we're just operating in this very small space. So by increasing our ability to engage with our emotions, understanding our emotions as I've explained, but also we need the technical language skills. So it's not just about emotions, it's about how much access do I have to, understanding the kupu that I need in order to have a conversation. What is the syntax? What is the makeup of the language that I need to be able to comprehend in order for me to have a normal conversation with somebody that we can keep going, outside of, without having to switch into language, English in that space. So basically all we're trying to do is widen and widen and widen our circles of where we feel comfortable using te reo. Through tools. Yeah.
You're so highlighting for me right now how incredible the connection between the brain and language is for a start, but also how important the kind of research that you do is able to feed and assist the homes who are probably just like mine at the moment. We're predominantly English speaking, but we want to grow to being more Māori speaking. And one of the things you talked about is the sense of maurito. So, and wanting to take calculated risks, which is probably, I'm assuming, not so different from maybe parenting, where you want your babies to, you want them to feel safe and then safely challenged to grow. And our language journeys maybe aren't so dissimilar to that. We want our language journeys to feel safe, but then we also, in order to grow, sometimes we need to challenge ourselves and just push that in order to calm those things that we might call whakamā or anxiety. And it's really highlighting for me how important your work is. But you mentioned resources and having those tools. Were there any particular resources, tools, etc., that you found were really helpful when you had babies and the moment had finally arrived where it was okay, this Māori speaking home that I had dreamed about is now something I want to bring into reality? If you think back to that time, was there anything that stood out for you that you really needed or I really needed?
I think I just went back to some of the examples, I think it must have been Paulette or somebody who explained about, she was changing baby, and then, you're trying to find kupu that you have never had to use because these are new experiences completely. And so, in terms of resources, I go back to I te whakamahia te reo e mōhio nei au. So I was just having to remind myself, and we've both had Winifred Bauer. She's been a strong advocate of using te reo Māori mai te kōpū. So as soon as you get the ultrasound and it says, oh, your baby's got ears, well, hey, kei te rongo mai te pepe, right? So from a very young age, I was just speaking about things that were happening in my normal day, so that baby could hear that I was using te reo Māori. So that became, the calm language, that became the language, still reading puka puka before baby's even born, so that, we could hear the intonation of the language. Some of the resources that I would suggest and that we did engage with was a library card. Find your closest library. You don't have to buy books. You don't have to buy anything in particular. You can if you want, but there are always another alternative. And we know that from all of the kohanga reo resources that have been, perpetually being created by Huia and, by our pakeke, by the nannies, by the aunties, and by our kaiako, So we are very, we're ingenuitive people. We are people who will find a solution to a problem. But what we need to know is what is our problem, okay, so that we can find a solution for that. So if I don't know what my language gaps are, how am I going to know where to create a solution? So what we needed to do for our own home was to, we created kupu lists for ourselves. We created, we used existing apps that I would use for teaching, like Quizlet. And as well as just, cards that I would use, from the $2 shop. So literally writing down. But these are things that I had already started before baby had arrived. But the kupu on those cards were, ahua, rere ke katoa, ngā horopaki, because these are the translations that I was doing from kurereo, and, these are much different words that I was looking for when I was trying to change babies' nappies and deciding, oh my gosh, how te kupu mo te puru, or what's, how do I say, take out the plug, how do I, so very normal sentences that we probably wouldn't think of until we reach that part of our lives.
I'm laughing because you've just said it, and I can just see this is going to be me in just a number of months. So, so I was sort of laughing and thinking, oh my goodness, okay, I want to get prepared a little bit earlier and make sure I've got my, my cards or my post-it notes or whatever going on. One of the things that really resonated with me and what you've just said is ourselves as a resource, and seeing that we actually do have, like a lot of us will have some language, even if it's just a little bit. We will have some kupu that we are able to integrate. We might be looking for resources and looking for tangible things we can buy or hold or rent or borrow or whatever, but that we ourselves are part of that too. We are going to move to some questions soon from the whānau watching. So if you are watching, please make sure you put your questions in the chat. But I just wanted to talk a little bit more before we do that about whānau who might not have two speaking parents in the home. And that might be because they don't have two Māori speaking parents, or they might have a speaker in the home of another language that's important to the household, etc., etc. There's like a academic name for a kind of parenting policy called one parent, one language, where like one parent will speak one language and another parent will speak another. And I was just wondering, for people at home who might be in this position, I am in that position too, is whether you can give us any pointers or direction or anything like that that you think you might have learned in your parenting experience. And I know that it's different, and I know that you've acknowledged that, but anything that could help us remind us that we can still do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely, we are such a diverse group of people who have aspirations for te reo Māori growth, and it's not as if we, one of the things that if we have a parent who is able to kōrero Māori, as much as possible. And so what the role of the other parent is to enhance that decision. So if it's also around, like negotiating space, negotiating values. So if you have one parent in the home who is ko tana mahi ko te reo Māori, that's a big job in terms of the emotional load that person carries, because they're effectively doing what two parents would normally do in terms of reinforcing a behaviour. So if we think of language as a behaviour, that needs to be supported by the other partner. And so in partnerships where we have, kind of a stable relationship, and we have, ideas around what it looks like to have a healthy home, then those are discussions that are easily managed. If we have other issues going on in the whānau, then this is something that we can't shy away from, So we do need to acknowledge that becoming a bilingual home requires us to engage with particular skills that will test us, will test our relationships. And also, it's being kind to ourselves. If we are that one person who is speaking that one language, the changes in the language behaviour of the tamaiti are going to look different in that home compared to a two-home speaking kāinga.
Right.
And so not to be comparing ourselves, one kāinga to the next kāinga. What you're doing is an amazing job. And so what we're looking at is what are the things that are going to keep that motivation going where you're getting those invisible gains, you know? So you're not getting that direct feedback at the moment because perhaps the child is still gathering that input that they need to create language output. So for some of the time, the children who come into, those one parent, one language homes, so, as somebody who actually grew up in a home with one parent, that's another issue. So, it is a privilege to, if we're thinking about two-parent homes and what that looks like. So if you're the one parent and you are doing your best, well, kia kaha koe, we are absolutely behind you, and whatever the positive changes that you're making, that's well better than, the majority of the homes that we are seeing. So, I think you've brought that stat up. 2.5% of us are using te reo Māori in our home. So if you're using te reo Māori in your home, even just for the basics, even if it's, relegated to te wākai, or relegated to te hukinga mai i te kura ki te kāinga, whatever that domain is, whakapūmautia te rā wāhi me te reo Māori ki roto i te rā wāhi. So, and I think, it's really important that we do have those conversations if we are in two-parent homes or two caregiver homes, that we are cognizant of the fact that this is also a values-based decision. So if our partner is, if this is a decision that one of the parents wants to make, how is that being supported by the other partner? And how do we bring each other along for that kōrero? Because it's not saying, hey, my way or the highway, because we don't want to create other issues in our whānau. Yeah, right, okay. So it's creating, and that's what I mean. We need good relationship management skills if we're going to have these discussions and these positive changes that can, and we've seen this through our research through He Kura Whānau Reo, an initiative that was started by Te Ātārangi, one of our longest standing institutions that has supported te reo Māori. One of the findings from that study, so they introduced te reo Māori for parents who were new learners of te reo Māori but who had their children in Māori medium education. So these were parents who had an aspiration for te reo Māori for their tamariki, but they themselves were still learners of te reo Māori. And what we found from the research that came out of that study was that the parent or the whānau who were able to kōrero Māori, this created another relationship domain where they were having meaningful discussions, they were playing games, so they had very specific, intentional time together. And so this is all really positive stuff, e hoa. Yeah.
That is so cool. You've taught me new words today, and I thought I had a pretty good capacity of English, but I'm learning some great words. And one of the things you mentioned is this idea of invisible gains, and I think that that's something that I have not necessarily appreciated, and I don't know whether many people who are watching will have realised too that when you do have one parent maybe who speaks a language and one parent who doesn't, you can still have some invisible gains. And I think that's really important, especially when we, if I reflect on my experience where some parents might mention to their child when they're speaking English, don't speak that or whatever. It's a good constant reminder, it's a good reminder to me to be constantly aware that there may be some other invisible gains. So maybe to lift that pressure off the kids a little bit. And that's beautiful. Thank you so much, e hoa. We have got some questions from the whānau. So I'm going to go ahead and read some of these. And then, let us know your thoughts on them, e hoa. For some learners of te reo Māori, their tamariki may already be at school, or they may have already raised their tamariki. Some may feel like they've missed the intergenerational transmission waka. What advice could you give them?
It is never ever too late to begin learning te reo Māori. We have so many beautiful examples of people who have learnt te reo Māori as pakeke and who have found a way to be nannies, koros, aunties, uncles who have demonstrated, the value that they see in Te Reo Māori. So for our pakeke, it's not as if, we don't want to put too much pressure on you to be, the next fluent speaker, but it's about what is the signalling, what's the value signalling that we're doing by, maybe we're going to a class, or maybe we're using Te Reo Māori, as best we can with our tamariki, or we are doing school pickups, or we're helping the whānau in another way. So there are lots of ways in which our whānau have been supported by as parents, we have been supported by non-Reo Māori speaking whānau members who have enabled us to be a functional, healthy home, which speaks Te Reo Māori. So there are lots of ways, that you can still learn Te Reo Māori at any age. There is no cut-off point. I think there's... I forget the word when you cut off one of your fingers and then, musicians are able to still play the guitar as a musician, you'll know, yeah. But there's something that happens in our brains that will help us to adjust what we need to adjust with the resources that we've got. So if I'm an older person and I'm wanting to learn Te Reo Māori, hey, it's just making that decision. That's a really hard decision to make, and then trying to work our way back. Okay, so if that's where I want to be in 5 years, what do I need to do in order to make that happen? Trying lots of different learning techniques, as you and I know, we have tried lots of different ways to learn Te Reo Māori, particularly, for whānau who might have neurodiversity, like myself, I needed to try lots of different things that were going to work in order to, so try things.
That's so cool. Thank you, Ewa. And it's true too that language can take more than one generation to change in a home. So there's a kōrero, tahi reanga ka ngaro te reo, toru reanga kia hoki mai anō. It takes one generation to lose a language, but maybe three, maybe more to get it back. And so there's still things that people can do, right, to continue that progression, even if their kids are already at school or their kids have grown up, to get further along towards that 3 generation. Do you have any tricks for when your child continuously speaks English, regardless of your commitment to only speaking Te Reo?
So again, this goes back to those invisible gains that we were talking about. So even if the tamaiti is deciding to respond in English, if they still see the person that they are speaking with as a domain, as a Reo Māori speaking only person, that's doing something even though we're not seeing the output. But it also is likely to be signalling that the child themselves needs to be surrounded by others who are demonstrating the value of that behaviour. So we see sometimes with our tamariki, they're clever as well, right? So they will know what's going to get a rise out of mum, today, ka tahira, and if she thinks that ko te reo Pākehā, that's going to get a rise, I'm going to do that thing. So, the kids are clever, but, if the child has relationships with other friendships, where they can see, actually, I don't really think that my parents are that cool, but I know who's cool. I know, the tuakana at our kura, they're the cool ones. I want to follow them. I want to be like them. I want to be like my kaiako. I want to be like the people who are role modelling this value. And so when they have that environment, that's going to encourage Reo Māori use because, everything that we're doing is cool. Yeah.
Do you think, and because you've got a psychology background, I think this is a cool question to be able to ask you as a follow-up. Do you think that, sometimes people are tired? Sometimes babies are tired. And so they might revert to a different language based on fully just psychological things. Tired. I know I do that. When I'm tired, I tend to revert to a different language, English, etc. Do you think that's something too?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So if the cognitive strain on our brains is out the gate, or if there's too much going on, what your brain is going to do is try and simplify what's happening in its environment so that it can get its job done. And sometimes that looks like Reo Pākehā, which is what, we've talked about before. Sometimes, we will use Reo Pākehā particularly if a kaupapa is urgent, if if there are specifics that need to be communicated between two reo Pākehā speaking parents, that's our first language, with it. It's also being generous to ourselves. We don't want to create too much burden on ourselves, so we are only able to communicate in te reo Māori anake when we need to have some kind of adult time when the kids are in bed, and I just want to be able to talk to my mates so that we can kind of catch up on the day as quickly as possible before one of them wakes up, and
So it might be like in those situations where you've got a child who's always speaking English or whatever, and it might be that we need to like read the situation and figure out, is this a power dynamic because my child wants to signal something to me as the parent, or are they tired? Do they have a psychological need in that moment, like what you were saying before? Are they really tired, or do they need, I think you said the brain wants to simplify. So is there something in the context that needs simplifying enough that would allow that child to speak in Māori or... Awesome. Kia ora hoa. How difficult is it for tamariki to be learning two languages at once at a young age? Is it better for them to spend the first few years only learning te reo Māori before learning a new language, or can you do something else?
I mean, ideally, I'm obviously going to advocate for te reo Māori anake mo te wā, because they have so much exposure to te reo Pākehā, atu i te kāinga and atu i ngā wāhi rumaki reo Māori. So as much reo Māori exposure from as young age as possible is obviously the goal, but if that's not your reality, then as much reo Māori that you can get your hands on. So that might be, pipima, that might be, whatever access, pūkoro, all of the different shows that are available, Tākaro Tribe, and then, extending outside of that, okay, so then how might I create opportunities for relationship development so that that child can see te reo Māori being used in normalised context. So, but yeah, koia pia, hei whakautu.
So it would be like as much te reo, hopefully for as many people who can, only te reo for as long as possible, because like you say, we are in a society where there is a high presence of English, and so people they'll learn it inevitably anyway. So as much as possible, but if that's not the kind of language situation you're in, as much as possible for as long as possible.
Aye.
Ka pai, tēnā koe hoa. We've got a few more minutes, but I think I'd just like to ask you a couple more questions. The first is a question about your whānau life at the moment. The second's more of a research-based question. At the moment, what are your tamariki into for the reo? What's really driving their language use at the moment? What's of interest to them? What's sparking inspiration? I don't know.
Yeah, okay. I suppose for the tamariki, it's having context. So, like, one of the awesome kaupapa that Te Rina Raureti has initiated, that's been supported by our kohanga and our kura, and Otaki Pools, is kaora. So she's created this way to integrate te reo Māori and water safety from our babies' lives. She's made sure that that's something that's been supported by our kohanga reo, as well as for our older babies, she's able to learn how to swim in te reo Māori. So creating context outside of kura life with their friendships, that's also a skill, a life skill that they need to develop. So, this is something that I think would be, it's great if we have initiatives that are demonstrating the value of te reo Māori outside of just a school context, or, context where we need those skills to be developed, and then we've got that kaupapa from kaora for us, particularly.
Specifically. Especially to relate two really important things, te reo and water safety, into one. But I was just thinking, what words do I know about swimming? And I actually don't really. So, maybe I need to go back and do kaora. Our last question to you, Ehua, before we wrap up is, we know that you've managed to begin or are about to begin some pretty cool research coming up. And so it would be really awesome to be able to talk to everyone at home about what that is and about how they might be able to contribute. I think we've heard lots of things today that hopefully, well, I certainly know now how the research that people like yourselves do affect my home life and can have a positive effect on my language. And so I think it would be really amazing to be able to share that with the whānau.
Yeah, kia ora hoa. So, kia ora hoa ma. We have an opportunity through ngā pai o te māramatanga to engage in some really cool research. So there are 4 different kaupapa for this particular rangahau. The first kaupapa is exploring some of the experiences of mātua who are raising their kids in te reo Māori. The second kaupapa is looking at the different pedagogies that are working for whānau. So Kelly Keen-Tuala is one of our people who is leading that kaupapa. We also have te reo o te hapori. So we have Dr Maureen Muller who is helping to lead that kaupapa. So, you know, thinking about what are the kaupapa that enable us to use te reo Māori outside of the classroom, how do we normalise te reo Māori use, and the last one is for our raukura. So those of us who have perhaps gone through, not us, but you know, our tamariki and those of you who have gone through kura kaupapa Māori, and you know, how are you using te reo Māori outside of a language managed domain, which is a kura, right? So what happens after kura? You know, what employment options are there for our raukura and that kind of thing. So if you're interested in taking part in our research, tēnā whakapā mai. Hopefully, yeah, we can find a way to include your voices into that rangahau, so that perhaps in the future we have that opportunity to have more understanding about what's going on for whānau and what's going to be useful for te whakarauoratanga o te reo Māori. Nō reira, tēnā koutou.
That was an awesome plug. Tēnā roa tū koe e wā. We've just about come to time, so I want to wrap up here. But the first thing I want to do is to recap on our conversation and in order to thank you for the taonga that you've offered us today. You have given us the ability to think about the research landscape that is here for te reo Māori in Aotearoa by sharing some of the things that you do every day when you go to work. But you've also related them, and this has been the really poignant thing for me, you have related them back to how I live my life, and I hope how other people live their lives. I hope it has resonated with the way people live their lives as well, who are sitting watching this, in terms of how I actually go about speaking a language at home. That it doesn't have to be sort of like an overwhelming, overarching thing that I have to sort of cognitively deal with in order to be able to contribute positively. It can be as much as I can for as long as I can while I go on my language journey and know that I'm doing something positive. I think something that's really hit home for me too is that idea of when our tamariki are maybe sitting in English, how we might go about looking at that, like not necessarily framing it as a thing we need to look at negatively, but we can couch it now in a way that allows us to think, maybe there's a need there. There's something there that I might need to provide in order to change that. So I really want to thank you, Ewa, for the time that you've given to us today and for everyone at home. And I also am really excited for this new rangahau that you have coming up, and I hope that our whānau do participate. I think sometimes we aren't so sure about how research actually, once we've given over, about how it comes back. And some of the things you've talked today have really resonated for me, how it does actually feed back and change lives and make the world a better place. So tēnei te mihi atu ki a koe kake puku maunga, mania pota iwi, mo te noho mai ki a tātou i tēnei rā, mo te ho mai i ngā taonga nui, o te mātauranga ki a tātou kei te mihi atu ki a koe te hoa. Tēnā koe.
Aku mihi nui ki a koe, Watira. Tēnā koutou whakarongo mai ana.
Kia ora mai tātou, kia pai te wiki o te reo Māori, Māori ora ki a tātou.